Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Today is the March 1st, 2023 Cincinnati Public School Audit Committee meeting. We will begin today's agenda by inviting Kevin Vaughn from our outside audit firm, Plattenberg, to report on our fiscal year 2022 financial statement audit.
Okay, yep, I can hear it now. Okay, you should have 3 documents related to the audit. One of them is the single audit reports. I believe you were given a copy of the ACFR, which is the large, thick financial report, and then a management letter. Yes. So I'm going to start with the single audit reports. They're kind of a summary of the overall audit, and that is the one that is in with the plastic binding on it. So if you go in there to the table of contents, I'll quickly give you an overview, and we're going to mainly concentrate on the summary at the end because these reports are very boilerplate, and I'm not going to bore you with reading through all the technical wording. So if you'll look, it references the independent auditor's report, which it's referencing the ACFR, which that's in the other report. You have in there the schedule of federal awards, which is the federal awards you expended during the year, the notes to the schedule of federal awards, which has the different accounting policies used related to that schedule. The yellow book, which is a government auditing standards report, is included in here on pages 3 and 4. And then on pages 5, 6, and 7, we have the single audit, also known as the uniform guidance report. And then we have a schedule of findings and question costs on 8, which is where that summarizes the entire audit in a format that the federal government requires each year. We'll go back there and cover all the overview of the audit, and then a schedule of prior audit findings and question costs. So if you want to go now back to page 8, we'll kind of go over the overall results of the audit. So this schedule has each of the reports. It starts off with the financial statement reports. So that's also the yellow book, which is related to the financial statement audit, the government auditing standards report. So your financial statement audit was an unmodified opinion, which is basically a clean audit opinion, meaning there weren't anything, we didn't modify the opinion because there was an adjustment not posted. The yellow book report that we did an opinion related to internal controls. Although we don't opine on internal controls, we do documentation and testing of controls, and then we report on the results of that. And we did not have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies identified related to the financial statement. And then we also give an opinion on compliance in the yellow book report, and that's related to the financial statements. A lot of that's related to Ohio law related to school districts, and we did not have any material issues to note in that. The federal awards audit, or under uniform guidance, single audit, that's the next section. So in that report, we tested the major federal programs of the district. We follow very specific guidelines of the federal government that are outlined in which programs we test, how they're rotated, what coverage we have. It's very specific and uniform across the country. There's not a lot of judgment involved in what we test or what we select. And then that report follows a similar format. It has internal controls, this time related to major federal programs, and also compliance related to the federal programs. So in that report, we did not have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies related to controls over federal programs. And then the type of auditor's report on compliance was unmodified, which again, an unmodified opinion is a clean audit opinion. So no material non-compliance noted. And they also specifically require we report on other audit findings related to the federal audit, and we did not have any there. This goes on to tell you which federal programs we tested for fiscal 22, We obviously did the elementary and secondary school emergency relief ESSER. That was a big one. Title I and Head Start were up for their triennial rotation. So we had to test those this year because they hadn't been tested in the 2 prior years and they were above certain thresholds. So we did 3 major federal programs. And then just reports here, there's type A and type B programs, and 3 million was used as a threshold, and that was using a calculation that the federal government requires. In smaller entities, it's typically 750,000, but you receive a substantial amount of federal awards and it kicks you up to another level where we do a calculation. And low risk auditee, you were a low risk auditee, and that has nothing to do with the fiscal 22 audit. That specifically addresses the 2 prior audits. So that's how that's determined. So you could have a terrible audit this year and it would say you were low risk, but next year it wouldn't. So, and then down here, it just summarizes again the GAGAS report, which is the yellow book, and the findings. It just requires us to note down here that there were none overall. So, and then page 9 just covers the prior audit. We have to follow up. There were no findings last year of a material nature that required follow-up. So that's kind of an overview of your audit. Now I'm going to touch on a couple aspects of your ACFR. Hit a couple highlights, a large report, just going to hit a few areas to note in there. So if you turn in there there's a financial section, and if you turn in there to page 1, it has the auditor's opinion. And I've already covered this, that it was an unmodified opinion. That's in the 2nd paragraph. We have new standard audit reports this year, so it used to be kind of further down, but it's there in paragraph 2. Basically says we believe the accounts and reporting are material in all material respects are accurate. And then if you go down there, of interest would be paragraph 4, which is an emphasis of matter. So we put this in here because this year there was a new GASB accounting standard that impacted these financial statements that was not in effect last year. And because of its impact, it had a tens of millions of dollar impact on the liabilities of the district. It was related to GASB 87, which is a new standard for leases, accounting for leases under GASB. So we'll hit on that a little more back in the footnotes, but because you'll see there was adjustments made to the beginning balances to implement this standard. If you go now to page 6, which is part of the management discussion and analysis, there's 2 pages in MD&A I like to hit on because they give you a nice financial recap from the current year to the prior year. I've hit on 3 items here. If you go down through here, you have 3 substantial changes that stick out to me. Under the deferred outflows of resources, you have a decent sized change, increase of 11 million on the pension. And then on the long-term liabilities, you see a substantial decline there, 357 million. That again is related to the pension. And I'll show you in the footnote that change. And then under the deferred inflows of resources, the pension line item, again, that one increased 266 million. So I'll just tell you right now that you're probably like, wow, these are some big changes, and they are some really big changes. But we are seeing this at every district that is in STRS and SERS. They're having these same, it's in proportion to their size, but they're having substantial fluctuations the same direction in all these accounts, just to set your mind at ease. So if you go to page 8 now, this would be similar to an income statement. It's the activities. This is consolidated for the whole district. And there's a few changes to highlight on here of a substantial nature. Under the program revenues, you have around an $81 million increase in operating grants. And that is basically your federal grants. It's a substantial amount, 55 million is related to increases in expenditures and revenue recognition related to the ESSER grant. Nutrition revenue recognition was up around 12 million in fiscal 22, and the remaining balance between that and 81 million is just other various grants, mostly the federal grants of the district. And then under general revenues, property taxes. So here you see $107 million increase, or decrease, sorry, I said that the wrong way. This is due to the impact of COVID. Back in 2020, all the counties in the state as a whole allowed everybody to delay the payments of the taxes. And the way between that and how the state auditor has a very specific bulletin on how they think property taxes should be accounting for, and that's exactly how they're accounted for in here. It results in this substantial fluctuation. I will tell you this year's number is much more accurate. If you go back 3 or 4 years, you were in that range of where you're at this year. So it's coming back down to the normal. The other years were impacted due to all the adjustments related from the current year to the prior year. It would take you 2 or 3 years back to be able to get back to see the good trend on that. And then grants and entitlements, that's down 67 million. And I believe you're probably aware of some of that. That's related to state funding model changes. And we're seeing all these changes I'm going over impacting all of the districts that we audit. It's kind of statewide, so these aren't anything too unusual going on for you. And then the instruction expense that decreased to 108 million. Again, a lot of that is impact, at least a good portion, pension adjustments, and I think also changes the district made on expenditure levels is part of it. So now if you'll flip back to page 60, this is your long-term liabilities footnote. So I just want to highlight a couple things. We do show in that first column, it's restated, and that's related. If you go about 3/4 of the way down there, you'll see a lease liability, beginning balance of 25 million. And that's related to that GASB 87 we discussed. And then net pension liability, I just wanted to point out there to you. So last year's liability was 649 million. It decreased around 301 million. And that's driving a lot of that. The impact doesn't all hit this fiscal year. That's what those deferred inflows and outflows, they kind of smooth it out over 5 years with amortizations, but there's also pretty wild swings in prior years that are also coming through those amortizations. So that's where we're at on the pension liability. If you go to page 66, this is just your 66 and 67, that's just your restatement note. Thought I would just point that out since we had beginning balance adjustments. So it mentions the new GASB standards. I didn't really touch on GASB 89. If you read the last sentence in that section, it says that this implementation of that particular standard did not affect the statements. So GASB 87, it definitely had an effect, seeing the lease standard. And there's also a restatement related to grants and how they're accounted for. And what we found out right before the audit was due, we started hearing kind of murmurs from the state auditor's office, from their accounting division, that they were looking at, hey, you know, how we've always told everybody to do the grants and how everybody's always historically done them for the last 25 years might not be correct. So they had basically almost every district where it's a material impact, we're doing a restatement. It's not anything the district did wrong. It's basically, there's types of grants in government. There's non-reimbursable and reimbursable. The non-reimbursable is kind of like you get the grant and it's just assumed your revenue when you get it. The reimbursable is, the idea is you expend it and then you get reimbursed, so you don't recognize revenue until you've expended it. So they've all along, ODE's always treated them as not as reimbursable, non-reimbursable, and they kind of changed that very late in the process, and we were kind of scrambling to get all this into the statement. It happened probably the end of November, but it impacts every district. It's not anything that you guys were doing different from anybody else. And then if you look on page 67, just hit real quick, this is the restatement note. The governmental activities, which is mainly what we've been covering, the consolidated information. You'll see that the change in intergovernmental had a net impact. You'll see on the fund level above, it was 26 million one way, or 29 million one way, and 29 million and a different number the other way, and the net was 780. So it was more material on the fund level is why we had to book it. It didn't have as much impact on the full accrual or consolidated. And then the change in intergovernmental receivables, are the receivables, that's the 780, and then the lease assets and lease liabilities. They equal here. It was really a zero impact, but we obviously felt like it should be noted because it was two different accounts increasing or decreasing by 25 million. And they allowed in the standard for you to not take into account the time value of money for the beginning balance adjustment. It was an option, and so that's what was chosen here. So that's why the two equal. It would have been a minuscule difference in the first year. And then going forward, you'll notice the leased asset, lease liability in the future won't equal due to the accounting for the time value of money. So that's all I have in the ACFR, kind of the highlights. That's a big report. And then I just have one other document to touch on. It's a management letter. I want to point out that this is not it's not an audit report. It's a separate letter between us and management. And it's basically recommendations, that we may observe during the audit. They weren't really material items that if they would have been, they would have been in these other reports that we went through. And the management letter is not submitted to the federal government, and the AOS does get a copy and reviews it, but they do not post it with the audit on the web because it's not meant. It is available technically to the public, but it's not really. You have to kind of know a lot more to really get the use of the letter. So the one comment here was related to the internal service self-insurance. The internal service fund covered the costs of providing health and dental through payroll withholdings of employees' share and changes to the district funds for employer share of insurance costs. Basically, it's pointing out the purpose of the internal service fund is to cover the cost of providing services. In fiscal 22, we just noted that there was a $4 million deficit, which might sound like a lot, but it's probably one month or so of premium, so it wasn't real substantial. But we're just recommending the district, and I believe this was already possibly in the works, to review with the benefits consultants and look to see if they need to make changes so that doesn't become larger in the future. So that's all I have to go through. If anyone has any questions, I know that was a lot of information, but there's a lot more information in here I didn't cover.
I have a couple questions.
Yes.
Back to findings, you were referring to the low risk auditee. Mm-hmm. What would be the implications if we were to ever not be considered low risk?
Yes, the biggest thing is it says you're high risk there, which catches people's eye, and they're like, "Ooh, what's going on here?" That's the question I get right away if I'm in front of a council or a board and they see that. The biggest thing is that we do for low risk auditee, you're allowed to do a 20% coverage on the audit of federal funds. So for high risk auditees, the feds require a 40% coverage. So most likely we require testing an additional or maybe two additional federal programs, depending on the mix of programs in a given year. And if you do wind up in that situation, it takes you 2 years to crawl out because you need 2 years of clean audit look back to be a low risk auditee.
Okay. And then on this recommendation regarding the self-insurance, is this, I read this and maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but wouldn't we just move funds from another fund that would have to cover the services anyway?
That's what happens.
Okay.
But you try to do it over time and not all at once because you'll have these big spikes or in your premium. Yeah, but that is exactly, it's the other funds and employee withholdings that cover the cost of that fund. But the idea is that they're to cover costs. So they don't like, the auditor state doesn't like when you become a huge surplus in there, which we have entities that have outrageous amounts of money build up in there because you're kind of overcharging the other funds. And they don't like, this was very minor, 4 million based on your total plan of 70 or 80 million. But over time, if it's not addressed, 4 million next year's 8 to 10 million, and it's 15 million, and all of a sudden you got a lot of catch up to do on your premium.
Jen, do you have anything are we looking into that or?
Yeah, so our medical advisors have already begun changing the premiums on the employee side, and we're monitoring it for the district's expense side. So we're looking at it monthly now instead of just quarterly. The last year's medical expenses were a lot higher than we've had in the past. I just didn't anticipate it being that high, so we'll adjust.
It was actually on the cash basis of accounting. It was about break even or positive. So you weren't really in the negative on the fund. On the cash basis is what you operate on internally. It was when all of a sudden you count for all those unpaid premiums out there. That's what pulled it, the IBNR reporting. And if you're familiar with that.
Unpaid premiums or unpaid?
Outstanding premiums. There's kind of a lag in, June 30th, the liability, they kind of look forward because those health claims are coming in and getting settled. They're being negotiated, and they don't always know right at a point in time. So months after the end of the year, there's like a lag reporting or IBNR, and that winds up, that gap accrual of that pulled that negative.
It's an unpaid claim.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to clarify.
Yeah.
Unpaid claims, not unpaid premiums.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Is this the negative net position? Is that an account that we can see in the statements, or is that rolled up into another line item in the statement?
Yeah, you can see it if you go to. I can tell you which page number because the internal service fund. If you look on page 23, that's the net position for the internal service fund. So you'll see it there, and you can see what makes it up. I mean, the fund actually had $2 million in cash in it. But by the time you account for the unpaid claims, you wind up negative.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on, Lauren, would you like to give an audit status update?
Absolutely. So good afternoon, everyone. I think we may just take a quick pause and welcome our newest audit committee member. Dr. Moffitt is joining us this evening and for the calendar year of 2023 and hopefully beyond because we're just the best group. So maybe it would be helpful for Dr. Moffitt if we do a quick round the table for our audit committee members to introduce yourselves, and we can then go from there. Wonderful. So I think you know the two of us already, so maybe we'll pass it over to Mr. Crossett.
I'm Jim Crossett. I'm a member of the audit committee, and I'm currently the chief financial officer of small corporation Mesa Industries.
I'm Liz Guttridge. I'm the vice chair of the audit committee as of last month, I think. I'm a CPA. I'm a tax preparer with a small family law firm in town, and I'm a CPS parent and alum.
I'm Dan Holdhouse. I'm the audit committee chair. I'm a CPA and a partner at a local CPA firm. I've been on the committee for about 10 years, and I'm a future CPS parent.
Since Eve made me do this, I'm Brandon Gregg, school board member.
And Dr. Moffitt, I'm Eve Bolton, board member.
And Dr. Moffitt, hi, I'm Christine Fisher, audit committee member since 2018. I'm the COO of a company called POSSIP and also a CPS parent.
Paul Kitzmiller, audit committee member for a year now, financial controller at MadTree, and proud parent of two, soon to be 3 CPS students.
Okay. My name is David Foote. I am a CPA. I'm also a senior manager in internal audit for Bon Secours Mercy Health. I've been on this committee for probably 10 years. I've kind of lost track. And I guess I'm a CPA or CPS grandparent. So
Right.
Wonderful. And Dr. Moffat, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to say to the committee, not to put you on the spot.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kareem Moffitt, board member, new to the Finance Committee. So happy to be here. Nice to meet everybody. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. So I will keep this rather brief, and then if you have any questions in anything I go over, please stop me, and I'm happy to expand. So I might do a couple of quick items. So just behind the PowerPoint slides, you'll see there are 2 resolutions. So as Liz just mentioned, she and Dan were formally appointed as our chair and vice chair via board resolution on January 23rd, as well as our reappointment of our 3 members listed on the second page there. So wanted to share that with you, that they are very official, and we're excited to have everyone continue with us. So the next document I'll pull up is spot on what Rob's got there. This set of slides we actually covered back at our June meeting, so I'm not going to go back through all the detail, but I did want to link that up. So as you go through the electronic version, it has all of the hyperlinks to the useful tools. So just a refresher for those who have been on the committee, and of course for Dr. Moffat who's joining us. There are 2 small items I'd like to call out. So if you could hop to slide 7, please. I did send an email to the group regarding a conflict of interest form for the year, and you'll see that is also included in the folder. So if this is something you haven't had the opportunity to complete, I'd greatly appreciate you filling that out and handing that to myself or one of my team members for our records. And then in more exciting news, the final slide here of this spreadsheet. The final slide, yes, before the question slide, are a few more updated links. So I'm just covering the changes since this June presentation. So Dr. Moffat and I can always get together more and go through some of the stuff we covered then. But you'll see there's the fiscal 23 meeting work plan. That is something we developed back in June, as well as the goals that we settled on, I believe, at our August meeting. So another opportunity, we're kind of at that mid-year mark, maybe a little beyond, to hop back in and revisit. You'll see on the agenda today some focus around our financial conversations and adapting those to be more dialogue focused, more impactful, if you will. So I think we're making good progress there. So I just wanted to use that as an opportunity to check back in on our goals. And I really do think we're progressing well, but if you see additional things, feel free to reach out to either chair or myself to make sure we're including things in future meetings. And then another housekeeping item, you'll see the 2023 Audit Committee schedule is linked up there, as well as that document includes our finance and other board committee meetings, if you are so interested. And we are also working on keeping the Google Doc, if you will, up to date, that has the meeting agendas, the meeting recording links, and the meeting minutes for all finance and audit committee meetings. So if you have any trouble finding it, let me know. I'm just trying to create like a one-stop shop for you all to look back at past meetings. So that didn't talk a whole lot about what is audit committee. I think we did a good job of that in June, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to go back to some of those areas or further expand. Great. So moving right along to our audit status report. Again, for the sake of keeping things high level, I just noted a couple of projects I'll verbally discuss, and the rest I'll submit as a written report. So under our advisory projects, our cash controls and minimization project has been one that has grown and grown as we've seen all the cash points throughout the district. And so we did have a meeting very recently with Jen's team to say, okay, I feel like we've had a lot of great dialogue, a lot of great ideas, but what do we need from internal audit? And I'm going back to Mr. Crossett saying, what is the impact of these advisory projects? And so I'm thinking ahead, what's the impact? What's the to-do from this? And so what we jointly decided on with the accounts receivable team is we're putting together a memo of recommendation based on our data analysis, based on our observations in 3 different areas. One thing we will opine on is school fees. The next are school cash handling. And then finally, minimizing cash through electronic payments. So we'll share this with you as we conclude this project, but I think we finally kind of honed in on the takeaways of all of this work. So those are three broad topics for a lot of detailed work that's gone on this year. And then moving right along to the second page there, pardon me, the third page, I think it's titled, our follow-up audit of benefits. So we are working diligently through the follow-up audit of benefits. This group had been briefed many times since the original audit was released in fiscal 2020. And for those who may not be as familiar, essentially the background is that we released an internal audit of our benefits programs, meaning our medical, vision, dental, life insurance, back in fiscal 2020. And our takeaway there were there are a lot of significant recommendations that management needed to address. In the time since, the audit committee has pulled forth the benefits department, asking them to give updates over the last 2 to 3 years. And after the benefits team had reported that 7 of the 10 objective areas were in fact complete and remediated, the audit committee and the internal audit made the joint decision. It's time to go back and test and validate those improvements to see if they are having the effect and impact the benefits team expected. So this audit, as many of our audits go, I think you've seen this common notion, is taking a bit longer for the sake of the data that we're pulling. We have found that the data is pretty vast and pretty difficult to manage through, somewhat similar to what we saw in the security audit. Certainly nothing is a one-for-one match and takes a lot of working through. But I will share the thing that I think is going to add a lot of value is that we are not stopping at the simple, it doesn't match. We're saying, why doesn't it match, and how do we help management understand the process it'll need to improve our reconciliations? So that's a bit of, a preview, if you will, of what we'll share at the May meeting. But I do want to just say that we are making great progress. We're concluding the testing this week. And so essentially from this week until we meet again in May 3rd, we'll be working with management to share these results, talk them through each step that we performed so they can have a thorough understanding of the data and our findings, and ultimately they can be well equipped to put remediations in place. And so that is the expectation, is this audit report, a follow-up benefits audit report, will be presented to this committee on May 3rd. Any questions about anything I've shared or anything else that was submitted in writing on the internal audit side? Great. And our final page here has a summary of our outstanding external audits. I believe we are still in progress of thinking through how we can provide some additional context from our grants team. But I think Jen and I will be happy to answer any questions if you have them. But in terms of what has been completed since our January 11th meeting, you can see there at the bottom, the Ohio Auditor of State was just what Mr. Vaughn shared with us. And then there was a completed grant of school safety review completed as well. So I submit the report and welcome any questions.
I don't have any questions. I would just make a comment. Just looking at this last page, we are a very audited organization. And so for all those involved, I know that this cannot be an easy process. So I would commend everybody involved in that process for having a clean opinion, not having any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, because I think that is an accomplishment. And it's certainly not the first time that this organization has had that. So to all those involved, thank you for the efforts. And we, as an audit committee by nature, we are overseeing the audit function, and so we know that we're part of that audit process. But I feel like we need to recognize those involved for their efforts. Does anyone have any other questions about Lauren's report? Okay. Moving on, Ms. Bolton, would you like to give an update for the district?
Yes, and I would be happy to have my colleagues or the treasurer or internal auditor chief help me. I'm just going to summarize a couple of things. One, we're in the midst of a budget process, obviously. And as you know, over the last several years, the budget process has gotten, I think, more and more transparent and more, I think, inclusive. This year, I think the budget process is attracting a lot more internal attention and external attention than it has in the past. And I think that's probably it complicates matters, but it also, I think, helps us along the way to have a more transparent process, and one that the community and the organization can better appreciate and influence. I would also say that there are a number of things in the budget process this year where there are larger or different questions and different conditions, and perhaps the treasurer can talk to some of these, but one is, again, the ending of pooling. Another is the issue that has been brought up in, I think, the ad hoc committee, which Dr. Moffitt chairs, which was the idea of how is it that so many of our schools are rated at 100% poverty or free and reduced lunch, and what program creates that? Is that true? How does that impact our marketing, and how are we understood in the community as a result of that? So that leads us to the question of how we use Title I, and does it follow the students, or which schools have it or which ones don't? And I think our superintendent just said last night and a couple of days before that as well, in her 30-some years, she's never heard a district talk quite so much about Title I and ask the questions and wanting to know this percentage or who has control of it and how does that impact. I think, too, also on the budget, we've had much more, and I think Member Craig would be able, Vice President Craig would be able to agree that we've gotten many more emails and individual contacts regarding school budgets. School budgets at least have reached through the development and the, I believe, the appeals process, but I don't know that it is at rest. I think there is still a continuing dialogue and discussion and concerns and hearing from different schools. The other thing I would say, too, some of you have been hearing, and the chair mentioned this to me before we started, and we have President Sellers here, her group, a remarkable job of I used to use the word targeting, but that's an unfortunate word anymore, of advocating for the students and the treasury, if you will, of Cincinnati Public, and trying to advocate and inform City Council. The City Council was talking in terms of, particularly led by the mayor, about more tweaks or, whistles or whatever about residential redevelopment efforts. And so they have been able to help postpone a vote that was going to be taking place. And so we thank them for that. But it's a continuing issue, as we've all talked about any number of years. It's not about the agreement that we have to start negotiating, but it's about an additional piece of influence regarding abatements for residential. So those are the two things that I would emphasize. Frankly, since the last time we met, I don't know if my colleagues or the treasurer or the chief wants to add. I'd appreciate it if you would.
I'll just add one component onto it, which is around the budget. And I think this is one of the challenges that we have as a district, is that we are trying to figure out each year how many students will be where. And, this is a continuous thing. It's going to be a project with regard to how we grow as a district, but also how do we manage what that growth looks like before we even know where the students will be. Because I think it's, again, part of the reality of our budget is that we ask schools to budget based on projections that we don't know about until students get in the building. And I think that's one of the challenges also with some of our schools right now, is that, and that was part of what was discussion of the concerns, was that there are a lot of resources that, yes, are budgeted based on the number of students in the building. However, parents, community members, teachers, and other staff within the school want to have these resources still available and want to be able to ensure these resources still be there. So I think it's just a constant part of the discussion about how we build our budget when it is very difficult to determine who will be in our schools each year. And so that's just the reality that we were looking at. I think the other thing to highlight is just the completion of or at least somewhat completion of the review of the contracts, and that we still have some that are still under review, that the superintendent and the treasurer went through all 800 plus contracts, as I think we talked about last time. And just to do something like that and to really look into what those numbers look like is a huge task. But it also is a mark about the fact that we're trying to get our schools to be able to operate more efficiently and effectively as we are making these relationships with the local vendors, with other vendors that are providing services to our students, so that we're being both a good steward of the dollar that we're being handed, but also provide the students best opportunities to learn. And so throw those two out there.
I really don't have much to add. I think my colleagues have done a very good job at explaining where I think the community stands. I will add that in the climate, I think the community understands that ESSER funds came and they were great while they were here, but that we do face challenges financially, and we're coming towards the cliff, and the money is tight. And I think that the heightened awareness of school budgets is in part because cuts have to be made and money is not as readily available. So I think it's a good thing that people are wanting to be title schools because they want those funds, but they also are paying more attention. And so that transparency that we're offering in the committee and with the community, in addition to what CFT is doing with regard to the city, is just another method to help people understand school finance and where we are. So I think it's a good thing. It's kind of a good problem to have that we are growing, but we have to be able to afford that. So I think we're on the right track.
This is a good segue into the section on financial discussions on our agenda. I did have I did listen to the finance, budget, and growth committee.
Something like that.
Those three words combined in some manner. Last week's meeting, and I watched the video back in December, the last meeting of the year, and I was kind of confused. There didn't seem like to be a lot of content that was relevant for me to consume that information. But this meeting was very different. And so I took some notes, and we've been talking about this for almost a year as a committee on how we can be better informed about what is going on in the district. And I was able to follow everything that you both just said because I watched that video. I don't know that I would have been able to say that a few years ago. And so I think it is going to be continually important for us as an audit committee, if we're going to provide the information, the benefit to the district as advisors, to in some manner consume the information in another way. So in addition to the abatements, insurance was brought up, investments, the contract process, which is an area that we've audited in the past, the budget. There were guests from schools to come talk about the budgeting process, which I thought was interesting. So what I'm going to recommend going forward for this group is I'm going to continue to watch those videos and try to do a one-page summary to circulate to the group ahead of our meetings so that that information is at least getting to us. I think it will make us better advisors if we are more in tune with what's going on in the district. Because as I've said and others have said, we are not necessarily educators, and so we're not going to be experts in education. And we're also not elected officials. So there's this area where we have to kind of play in the middle. But I think the information I was able to gather just from a 2-hour video was very good for my benefit as the chair. So I do not have much more in terms of financial information to discuss. I think going forward, I will circulate that information and we can have a discussion as a group. And then it'll help inform what we're doing as an audit committee and how we're directing Lauren and her team.
Yeah. I know that we would really appreciate it, and I know the treasurer and the superintendent would too, more of a involvement and being able to have that reaction proactively, reactively, whatever, from you as advisors and experts to help us through this. And we really welcome the watching and also the reacting and having some dialogue. I think we've, in the last several months especially, I think we've kind of enjoyed more of this dialogue that you all have been having, so appreciate it. So I look forward to that, and it's nice of you to be willing to do that and then share beforehand. So we also try to behave better. Speaking as the chair, my colleagues behave very well, as does the public, but I'm the one that tends to make things run a bit longer, or maybe saying things before we've adjourned and people are listening, so that's a problem. So I'll clean up my act a little bit too, if I is. But thank you so much. This, I think, is a great plan. Would be very helpful. Thanks.
Mr. Chair. It's also recommend for folks who are able to pull up the the finance town halls are another great resource to understanding what the district's doing as far as their budget and how these things are calculated. And again, those are ones that you can pull up on YouTube, and they're a little easier to digest sometimes than some of the other rigmarole that we do in the budget, finance, and growth committee meetings. And so,
those finance town halls, do we think we're getting questions about the budget because of the information we're putting out there? Is that a direct?
I don't know if you want to answer. I think that we are. I think people are. There's a heightened awareness because it directly impacts. And so we've done probably what, 4 now? 4 or 5?
I think we're on our 3rd for this year. We did several last year too.
Yes, but they're really, really good because we did one on ESSER. We got great questions. They're on Facebook and they're on Blue Jeans, or they can come in and they're online asking questions in real time, and they're great questions. And so the good thing is Jen doesn't have to keep explaining how we built the wheel, because we just say, go back to the September show, and they do. And so I would be very interested in the analytical data, because I think that the views have grown since then. But I think that people are asking questions. Yesterday's topic was about title funding, and Jen also shared she had not had those questions before about title funding, because now it's applicable for people. And so we can now refer them back to the video on title funding. And we've got the finance chair there to answer questions, the superintendent there to answer questions. I'm kind of comedic in my facilitation, but it still isn't a way for them to be less intrusive and get their questions answered. So I think it's a direct result of the fact that they understand that changes have to happen, and they want to know how does that impact them directly. I will also say our policy is that LSTMCs are to review and approve the budgets. And now LSTMCs are really taking into that to heart, because the cuts directly impact them. They're paying attention to how staffing is looking and where the money is going. And so in order to make those informed decisions responsibly, I think they're wanting those questions answered as well. So it's kind of all, it's coming together, I think.
So it's funny how you asked about the metrics, because I just got an update today. While the Blue Jeans numbers aren't huge, the Facebook reaches are significant. So last night we were 774, and as of today it was up to 817 Facebook reaches, and then we had at least 30 comments. So it's and I was telling them last night, I remember when I first started doing budget presentations, I would have 2 people show up to a public meeting. So this is huge, and they're actually a lot of fun. And so I'd encourage you to watch them. The next one is going to be on state and federal grants. And maybe an ESSER update if we have time. What we try to do is do 2 or 3 slides and then just open it up for questions, and it just turns into a dialogue like you're on a newscast. Lots of fun. So yes, there was a lot of questions had a lot of confusion about title this year, because we left the school-wide pool and we went back to normal non-commingled funds. And so the compliance challenges are a lot harder to do. And so there's a lot of questions about what I'm allowed to do, what I'm not allowed to do. If you remember, No Child Left Behind allowed us to commingle our state and federal grants with our general operation funds. And once the grant entered the pool, it lost its identity. So we had a lot more freedom to spend at the school level. And now it's a little bit harder. But in order for us to implement our equity policy and to be able to financially report on how we're doing equity, we needed the identity back. And so it's, pros and cons of each. We're making some significant inroads. Following the board's goals and guardrails and using our equity indices, excuse me, to make spending decisions. We did review all 884 vendor contracts for key performance indicators. And so that was a huge learning experience for a lot of people. And now we're trying to formalize it through Cody Hutchins, who's our contracts analyst. And we're hoping to, as new contracts get entered into our financial system, before they get to the board, the key performance measures will be identified, so the board will know what we're looking for before they vote. And then we'll have some ability to do some analytics off of that as the results come in. So we're really excited about that. Part of the budget challenges that we're seeing are because we used so over the last 2 years, we've been able to use our ESSER funds to maintain school staff that we wouldn't normally have maintained because of enrollment changes. And so if you remember the first year in COVID, people were laying off employees all over the place, closing doors, universities closing. We didn't lay anybody off, although our numbers should have told us to. So we wanted to maintain our employee base based on the professional skills. And the last 2 years, while we're getting closer back to where we were for our enrollment formulas, we're not quite there yet. And so next year, we went back to our basic formulas. And so that's why people are feeling a little bit extra pain that they weren't anticipating. And so we're trying to smooth that out. The other challenge was we had a little bit of a snafu at the very beginning of the process, which delayed the entire kickoff of the budget. So everybody's working under a compressed timeline, and that feels very anxious, and there's a lot of anxiety around that. So we didn't get to do a lot of reporting and engagement through the steps that we normally would do. But I think we've caught up a little bit, and we're making progress. One unfortunate piece of news is that several weeks ago, when I was at a conference, received a resignation of our assistant treasurer. She was sought out by Mount Healthy Schools to be their treasurer. It's a wonderful opportunity for her. She's very excited. I'm thrilled for her. I'm heartbroken for me. We had a fabulous working relationship, and she was part of my succession plan. So took the wind out of my sails for a few days, but we're working, and we've already received some applicants for new employees, so we'll make it through. But I just wanted to let you know that she wasn't out looking or anything, not unhappy, a little bit stressed because she was kind of helping me through this transition, but they came after her. And treasurers there are a lot of vacant treasurer positions. In fact, the Columbus City School District just resigned or announced his resignation for July. So Akron and Columbus both have vacancies. Cleveland just filled theirs after 3 attempts to fill, and they received an employee who's from the Department of Corrections, so he doesn't have K-12 industry. We're going to kind of huddle with him and help support him through his initiation. As my colleagues, I call it Jen and the men because the other urban treasurers are men, and we meet every Thursday morning on a huddle, so to kind of help support each other. So a lot of changes, but we have a strong team and we'll get through it. Did I miss anything? Okay.
I had a question about some of the shifts between magnet and neighborhood school designations and enrollment rules. I had imagined that has a budgeting impact, but my understanding is that there was a number of changes made this year to either boundaries or magnet designations, and was curious if that was initiated for budgetary reasons or for programmatic reasons or transportation.
Yeah, I think we can speak to that. I do want to encourage the people that follow the district and pay close attention to be watching and participating in what we call the ad hoc committee, which is really investigating and researching according to its direction from the board. First and foremost, the boundary lines, attendance lines, and enrollment policies, if you will, as it pertains to all of our elementary schools. Not necessarily our high schools, but part of that too, besides looking at those attendance boundaries, because the reality is We have how shall I say, we are very full at the preschool level, and we are very full at the high school level, and we are not full and probably not maximizing the use of our elementary buildings to the level that we need to. Not that some are empty or have fewer kids. It's not really about that. It's that we don't have the critical mass that you need of enrollment in order to actually financially provide a full program. So that's been one of the concerns. We also, in the last few years, have been really reviewing, as you know, rededicating ourselves to neighborhood schools with the Vision 2020 from the Superintendent Mitchell, but also looking and seeing, even before the new superintendent arrived, looking and seeing which of our magnets actually were authentic in their programming. And now our new superintendent has conducted, her folks and she have conducted a full programmatic review of our schools as it pertains to program and the authenticity of those programs. Besides that, we've made some decisions along the way as well, where we had, I think, 3 schools or so noted as college prep. Well, the reality is this district and this board believes that every one of our schools, or elementary schools and what have you, should be college prep. It shouldn't be a special, an attention piece. So that's been going on. And I think we've mentioned, and I'll do it very quickly, that we used to be and are still known as a neighborhood district and a magnet district. The reality is if you remove the Montessori schools and talk about it being a Montessori system, if you talk about our, what I would call international schools, where there's a significant proportion of the enrollment are, English language, second learners, that kind of thing. And you also start talking in terms of removing the preschool piece, we're really down, and we remove the exclusive schools of SCPA and Walnut. Once you start doing that, you really are down to probably less than 6 magnets out of 60-some schools, technically, because you can't even, we've never been able and never have counted Walnut as a magnet. I mean, literally, I think somebody you know very well is the person that kept saying literally that, and legally that is not a magnet. It's a different kind of school. So we're in a very different place right now. And I think that at ad hoc, we will be getting even more technical with Jeremy's help about the boundary lines. And there'll be some kind of a mix. There'll be east and west lines, I would imagine. They'll be specific to neighborhoods because there's an interest by many people to have more of an alignment with the neighborhoods when possible, or a combination of neighborhoods like we've done with CANS, rather than the rather specific lines that were drawn, very frankly, in part as a result of the civil rights cases and what have you. Now the very reasons and the very purposes that have been used to draw many of our lines, legally you can't do that anymore. So it's a great effort, and I think it has financial reasons, especially as it pertains to trying to make the transportation system better for us. And I think we have reached, Chair will correct me, we did reach a consensus finally of thinking in terms of our district, and I think we've shared this before, of 3 corridors, west and central and east. Not quadrants, because you can't have 4 of everything, but we might be able to have 3 of almost everything, plus metro lines run basically north-south. So it's an exciting time. And I think we have a superintendent that's interested in making moves, maybe more quickly than previous folks, maybe because she doesn't quite understand what all that might entail just here in this town. But I'm just very excited about what we're doing. But it has financial impact, it has staffing impact, and also there's an interest within the ad hoc committee, and I'll end with this, of finding more ways to have a little bit more of an opportunity for having middle schools. We've done the PK 6 and PK 8, PK 12. We used to have junior highs. We got rid of those. And after we did the facilities master plan, we had a model of K-8s, and then it was going to be 9-12s until we did that for a year and a half, even after we'd finished building the place. And we said, no, it's not helping the primary grades to have the 7th and 8th graders there. So there's a great opportunity, and I think it's going to have a massive impact as long as we keep the community involved with that. Thanks for asking.
As the chair, I'll just add our board historian over here has done a very good job of summarizing our meetings, and now you can see why our finance meetings go so long. So full of knowledge. But the only thing that I would add is that we are discussing. We've not made any recommendations to the board for any changes. And so I think that the people have heard the changes and think that, oh my God, you're doing this. All of those things that were wonderfully described have all been discussions. The audit was given to us in December actually, and then we had our meeting in January and we discussed it. But we've not made any recommendations formally. Last week we did have our consensus on exactly what Board Member Bolton shared, but there have been no finalizations that have come out of that. We are really interested in, I'm going to say it in my way, but I think all of us are interested in the intersections of how does the program impact enrollment, impact transportation, impact the budget. We're really interested in all that. So we're data collecting right now. So all of this is in fact finding. Nothing has been determined.
Dr. Moffitt, just to make sure, the only changes that were actually or discussed that actually have implemented were something that was already changed that we were clarifying, right, with regard to programming in schools. So like if a school already was not a magnet school or was not something but it had programming listed on there, that was the only thing that we clarified this year.
Right, we didn't change anything. She just clarified, and she just performed a district audit of does this school who is listed as a PADEA actually teach the PADEA methodology? Does this school that's listed as a leader in me, what does that mean? Because we didn't have that designation listed. And so that was really, again, just finding the information out. And I think what happened is people are super nervous. We've been seeing an influx of letters, rightfully so, because everyone is hearing when we ask about how does transportation impact that, well, with the current policies, it would impact it maybe negatively, but we've made no changes. So we're just, again, it hasn't impacted it at all. And I think that that's the biggest thing to take away is that we've not made any district changes, recommendations.
I would also say to that, if I could, some of the changes were put in place, but not carried out by the administration. That goes back 3 or 4 years. There's also, I think, 5 elementary schools whose lines have been kind of agreed to, but again, not acted upon, which is part of the problem of the big ship moving around. The other piece I would suggest is that some of the stuff we're adding on to PRM because it was determined 3 years or so ago that Pleasant Ridge, Montessori, those lines would not be changed because it is as popular and as, how shall I say it, full and I guess authentic to what it wanted to be. So some things are in different stages. I do think we will, and maybe it's me, but I do think there will be several things that will impact the 24 budget, but it's not been advised or agreed to by the whole board yet.
Will all of these discussions take into account thinking about parents and not just the student's ability to learn, but take into account the parents' ability to migrate their options? Because I have had feedback that, for some parents, it's really difficult to figure out what path is best for my child. So is there some component of this that will have, I'm a business person, so I'm going to use the wrong language, but is some of this going to be, customer focused on a parent as a customer, even though they're not, I'm using the wrong word.
I would say yes, because some of it is district driven, meaning we have to have a comprehensive plan. You can't have a fragmented plan. So that's going to maybe look ominous, but it's like chess. You move one piece, you have to move another. So there's the district focus and force, as you point out. And keeping that in mind, we also understand that I think we have over the last many years become much more focused, not only student-centered, but more family-friendly. And I think most of these moves will be positive for families. And also the grandfathering of any major changes is going to be part of the transition as well, which I think will help.
I had one other question, if we can take a step back to the budgeting topic. Are there out there tools that could help automate the budgeting process that maybe we haven't taken advantage of, because you talked about the time crunch? And is there something you could look forward to say, okay, maybe there's a new tool out there, a new methodology that could help? Or maybe you're already looking at that. Or what's the biggest stress point of budgeting?
It was just the window of time. So the first step that got delayed, that kicked off the process. Everything else does use the software into tools, and so that's why we were able to kind of catch up a little bit. It's just the beginning, and then because we missed that first window, we had to postpone 2 weeks because of the holidays. So that just made it even more challenging. But yeah.
I don't know if there's the technology piece of it, but one of the things we do kind of interpersonally that I know exacerbates some things is doing the schools. And this is because we don't have enough people to do everything at once, but doing the schools sets up a kind of the turf problem among the schools, but more particularly a turf problem between the schools and the central office, which is already kind of an emotional, normal symptom of schools and what have you. So I think anything that we could find ways to expedite, and Jen, I'm not going to say it, but that's why I also think that we try to do June 30th, but that's it. Nope.
So just to reiterate the difference of opinions, we're required to have an adopted appropriations resolution by the end of June to file it with Hamilton County so I can cut the first check of the year in July. We are allowed to do a 90-day appropriation, so that gets us to the end of September, but it is an accounting nightmare to deal with. And so we would much prefer not to go that route. We did it 2 years in a row, and it's very, very difficult to manage. But I mean, if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. But I'm still hopeful that we'll get to the end of June.
Okay, are there any other business or questions or comments from the audit committee? All right, then we will adjourn.